Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got two very special guests joining us this evening. The first of those is David Stoughton, and he's joined us from Living Streets, Cambridge. Hello, David. And he'll be talking to us this evening about his work with the Living Streets Cambridge branch. And we're also delighted to give a very quick hello to Josh Grantham, our new Camcycle employee. So hello to Josh. And thanks for joining us this evening on day 2 with Camcycle. And there'll be a proper opportunity to catch up with Josh when we do the campaign roundup at the end of David's talk. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to David to talk to us about his work with Living Streets in Cambridge. Living Streets is a national organisation which is primarily focused on walking and improving things for walkers. And David is heading up our Cambridge branch. So, David, over to you.
Good evening. We're a new and rather small local group. I suppose just launch straight into the history for a moment. We were formed in 2020, so not that long ago, in September, and it took a while to get moving. So around Christmas time, we started to run a survey of opinions across Cambridge. I mean, using social media largely, on the barriers that people encountered when walking, and we let that roam quite widely. So whether they wanted to mention, difficult pavements or fences that were, or hedges that weren't cut or something, all of that went in there. We got about around 350 responses, which we were quite pleased with at the time, and it seemed to be a reasonably satisfactory result. But we had to let it run till April. It took a while to get through that, get it properly constructed. So when it came out on the 15th of June last year, so it hasn't been extant that long. So that is an excerpt from the executive summary. I will not read it to you because there's no point. I'm going to summarize some of the findings in a moment. But broken pavements and street furniture that's placed right in the middle of the pavement, where trying to get a wheelchair past, even a pushchair past, is impossible. Were very, very high on the list of complaints. I mean, we get things like, you've got a sort of what should be a cover over a drain on the pavement that's just broken open. So when you've got people walking along with canes and things, it's really dangerous. So a lot of this kind of stuff was pointed out at the time. And of course, pavement parking, which I'll come back to in a moment, was mentioned by about 75% of the respondents. It's everywhere, and it's growing. Actually, I think COVID seems to have given everybody permission to park on the pavement suddenly. They all claim to be in a great hurry. So pavements are convenient, and it doesn't, they think about inconveniencing other drivers, but not anybody else. And that means it extends very regularly into the cycle lane as well. So it affects all of us, I think. And they came up with one word, which is enforcement. I mean, none of it. So we have problems mentioned to us from, people cycling on the pavement, I'm afraid, which is quite common. I was driven off a pavement only a couple of weeks ago by somebody cycling along narrow pavement. They weren't going to get off, so I had to walk in the road. And that seems to be happening quite frequently. So, I'm not blaming anybody on the call, just it's one of those things that we're encountering. E-scooters are even worse, and particularly the delivery drivers, who seem to think that the pavement is the way to get between A and B if the road is blocked. I know they're paid by the hour, and I understand the motivation, but it's a disaster for people who are trying to walk along, and particularly for elderly people, and of course the blind, which is one of the groups we've been working with quite a lot recently. So we compiled those findings. We managed to get a reasonable amount of press coverage, and we went, as everybody does, to the Highways and Transport Committee to find out whether we could get anything done about it. And this time, actually, there's some sort of positivity. they have been given a considerable grant by the government, 4 million to spend over 4 years, in fact. And they're spending 50% of it on what they call preventative treatment, some of which is curing defects. I've checked, there is a program started in Cambridge very slowly to get some repairs done, but it's prioritized, and I've been through this with them, on the basis of what they like to call asset value, which is a kind of fake book value that the accountants attach to it. It's nothing to do with amenity value. It's nothing to do with whether or not it helps more or less walkers. They're not interested in that. They're only interested in, I suppose, what they call their balance sheet. And that's another area I want to get to grips with them. So what we got at the time was a promise from the then leader of the council to reform what used to be called CJACs, which I think are council joint action committees, which went out of fashion apparently a few years ago. But now that we have a change of government, a change of party at the county level, apparently they could bring them back. But we've been waiting now since last June, and nothing has happened. So, and I chase it every month, at least, probably more often actually, but there never seems to be a response. Until we get that working, we're not going to get behind getting the public voice into how we prioritize repairs. I don't know if you find the same with cycle tracks, but it may well be that there's some similar way they attach an artificial value to things. Just to take it on, to go back to the formalities, we didn't really commence formal meetings till July of 2021, partly because it was formed by half a dozen people initially, at most. And it wasn't until July, when we got this, obviously we got the report out, that the membership started to build to a point where we wanted to make it formal and get it registered as a formal group with the council. So we agreed a constitution and got it approved and sent it to the various bodies that need to know that we're properly constituted. But leaving aside the condition of pavements issue, by September we'd agreed as a group to focus on pavement parking. It's just, apart from the condition of the pavements, the one thing that everybody wanted us to tackle. Everybody finds it's a nuisance. And fortunately, we were able to form some partnerships. So we partnered with the RNIB, who've got a kind of national campaign going on here, but happened fortuitously to be shooting a video in Cambridge in conjunction with Camcycle to promote this, and also with the Red Cross Area Residents Association, with this little group in front of the sign down there represents, because that's the only representation I can find at the moment. But and that is on our website, their version. It's quite long, actually, the video they shot. But working with them gave us quite a lot of clout to get things done. Unfortunately, we had to wait a long time to get things moving, for the video to be completed and for everybody to agree on a plan of action. So nothing really launched until December, January of this year. But we built a campaign website for it, which some of you may have seen at stumblingstreets.com, with this wonderful piece of pavement parking on the on the home page. There's a wide pavement in part of Hills Road, so it was blocked completely by double parked cars on the pavement, which is unique in my experience. But I watched a wheelchair driver had to go into the road on Hills Road to get round these I think 4 cars, well, a van and 3 cars, parked completely blocking it on the only wide stretch they could find. Brilliant. We put together a rogues gallery. We collected photographs that people had taken in the first 2 weeks of February, just of the encounters they had. I guess it doesn't represent very much more than a small snapshot of the real numbers out there. I think there were about 220 by the time we went live. We got quite a lot of press and radio coverage. So the Cambridge Independent came up with a good article. Cambridge 105 got quite interested, actually. So we wound up with 2 different programs on 105, and there were a few minutes on TV Anglia West, which I will attempt to show, but it means I have to stop sharing and start sharing again so you can see the video.
A walk through Cambridge can sometimes be a scary experience for Hadija, and cluttered pavements can leave her avoiding the city altogether.
At the very least, things like pavement parking, things like obstacles, they are frustrating, but most of the time it can be hazardous. You know, I find myself having to walk on the road to get around things sometimes because there's just not enough space. And I shouldn't be having to do that. I have less information than most people when just walking out and about, because, you know, when you can't see, it is a bit worrying. You know, the fact that I have to negotiate extra things than other people, I find that to be quite unfair.
That's why Hadija's backing a campaign to ban pavement parking in Cambridge. It's being led by the charities Living Streets, Camcycle and the Royal National Institute of Blind People.
We want to be able to clear the pavements for people. We ran a survey last year across the city. We had well over 300 responses. 70% of those people said that pavement parking was one of their major problems, and 70% is quite significant.
In Peterborough, the City Council's activated verge and pavement parking restrictions in certain areas, issuing almost 400 fines in nearly 4 years. Cambridgeshire County Council says it's hoping to get more enforcement powers this summer as a result of a national review into pavement parking.
We have limited powers. We send the enforcement team where there are cars parking on double yellow lines, for instance, or some, but most of it is still with the police, and they have very, very limited abilities to do anything at the moment because they don't have the resource. So a lot of the stuff that we complain about falls between the cracks. In July, we hope we will get more powers as a local authority, and then we may be able to attack it with more vigour.
In the meantime, Hadija wants to encourage people to be more considerate and to see the streets differently. Sarah Cooper, ITV News, Cambridge.
So anyway, I mean, that was quite useful coverage for us. And it was one of the things I was able to bring to councillors. So we obviously went back to the Highways and Transport Committee, but also to the City Council meeting to try and get some real attention on this. And what I did following that was to send out a copy of the permission that was given by the Under Secretary of State in February 2011. And that gave permission, there's only just the top end of the letter here, but that gave permission to all councils to use traffic restriction orders to ban pavement parking if they wished. And it has to be up, it was left up to the councils to decide whether they wanted to do it or not. And that's what Peterborough has used, Peterborough City Council has used in the action they've taken. So, and they're perfectly capable of doing it. And they don't deny, I mean, well, obviously they've used it anyway. But of course, despite all that, the county council have written back to say they can't do it. They say they don't have the powers. They presented no evidence to contradict the evidence that we presented to them. We've introduced them to the people in Peterborough so they can talk with the city councillors in Peterborough. So we're now trying to investigate the basis on which this decision was taken, to try because somebody somewhere is either working with very out of date information, or this is a refusal by officers to devote time to it. I'm not sure. I mean, those are the only explanations we're able to come up with so far. My instinct was to come out with a press campaign immediately to raise it, but calmer voices have asked me to investigate first. So I'm doing the investigation at the moment. We shall see what it turns up, but I'm not averse to get it, activating the press again to ask questions about it. So we're waiting. We're waiting for this CJAC, as it's called, that was promised in July, to finally meet, and act as some sort of conduit through to the joint councils to get action worked out. We're waiting to find out why the county council thinks it doesn't have the powers when, as far as all the evidence goes, it does. And we're waiting to see whether the combined authority might decide to come in and do something over the top of all this anyway, which is more or less where we are right now. It's a kind of summary because we built up to 75 members, which I'm moderately pleased with, in the sense that it was a very slow start, but it does mean there are actually only a very few active members, and as a result we can only run a certain amount of work at any one time. So this is a one campaign at a time job, and we'll see where it goes from here. Anyway, that was my summary of where we've got to so far. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for giving us an update on where you are. It's brilliant to see that we've got a walking campaign now here in Cambridge. And of course, all our viewers will be really familiar with many of the frustrations that you've experienced so far with your campaign. You've obviously been very tenacious in your campaigning so far. And so you've mentioned some of the sort of media opportunities that you've had. And let's not forget the contribution that you made to our most recent publication as well. But really brilliant, you know, an example of a local group where you're really taking on an issue that matters to so many people, but also one that you can, where you can connect with other local groups as a way of, you know, increasing the impact that you're able to have. And one of the things I was interested to ask you about was why, when you began thinking about the work that you wanted to do around this, what made you want to connect with Living Streets as a group? And in what ways has being a branch of a national organisation been a helpful way to to deal with local issues?
Interesting question. If I'm absolutely straightforward about it, I was asked whether I'd take this on in the first place. And I thought about it. I contacted the head office and asked where we were and what kind of contact they had with people in Cambridge, and then decided it was probably worth a stab. There had apparently been an older group set up in Cambridge. I don't know how active they were, but it obviously fizzled out at some point earlier this century, and really it was a kind of revival. But yes, I agreed to take it on. We do use national resources to some extent. And they've got a lot of examples of how campaigns have worked in the past, which we draw on, you know, reasonably extensively. That said, you know, I mean, when it comes to running a campaign, we're on our own. You know, we have to put it together, find our own alliances, etc.
And you've obviously, as you mentioned, you've made really good use of local alliances, identifying them and then approaching them to work with them, which is really good to hear, sort of building a network around yourselves. One of the other things that you talked about quite extensively was the work that you've done with local councillors and local councillors. And I wondered what your experience of that has been like as somebody new to campaigning in this area. You know, how accessible have you found it as somebody taking on a new project like this?
I think the only answer I can give is variable. There are some councillors who are quite accessible, and I get to speak to them quite regularly. At least one, I'm not going to name any names, who's never responded to the entire period to any inquiry. So I work as much as I can through the ones who do respond, but that isn't always getting me to the right places. So I have to try and bring pressure on them weekly. You probably find from on other councillors by through their comrades, if you like.
And even things like finding the right sort of evidence that you need to support the points that you're trying to get across and so on. How have you found that sort of thing? Do you find yourself working very independently on that, or is that something that Living Streets, you know, working as part of an organisation, is that helpful for that sort of thing? Yeah.
There is evidence from, so it was through Living Streets we found out about the Peterborough connection. We got some information from Edinburgh about pavement parking they've done there. I'm a great believer in collecting evidence. This is why we started with a survey. So, and that's why the 200 or so photographs we took, you know, because it's so often we get people disputing the facts. So evidence I think is important, and the National Office does hold quite a lot of evidence, but obviously they don't hold it by area unless I contact the actual area. So it's, you know, people can say, well, yes, but it doesn't happen here, which I've had as a reaction.
So again, just having to do quite a lot of digging yourself as well. Yeah. We've had a few notes come through from our listeners this evening. There's a note from John Morris in Huntingdon, who's joined us. Hi, John, nice to see you this evening. Huntingdon District Council's taking on civic parking enforcement powers from 2023, and many other councils have already taken on these powers. So that's going to be good, if you, for want of a better word, ammunition for you going forward.
Thank you. That's really useful. I mean, a part of our problem here is the split nature of our administrations here. Everybody wants to pass the buck to somebody else when it comes to these things.
Yeah, understood. Although I guess that with the enactment of Part 6 this year, some things will be made more straightforward within the county too.
Let's hope.
Let's hope. There's also a comment from Martin. Hi, Martin, saying that he thinks that the difference is that the counties, I'm not sure, sorry, Martin, I'm having to rewind here, the difference that you're referring to, but that the county's letter says, at present, we do not have the powers to enforce pavement parking as a whole. And Martin's comment here is that as a whole, presumably means a Cambridge-wide approach. The DFT permission requires signs everywhere, which makes it in practice surely difficult to implement. Though of course there are hotspots like Mill Road where it could have started, and they could get going with specific places perhaps. He comments again that the proper solution is as per your the Living Streets campaign nationally to ban pavement parking as the default situation. But yes, there are obviously complications, aren't there? Idiosyncrasies, depending.
The method adopted in Peterborough and some other, Sheffield is about doing the same. And I mean, Huntingdon, I'm interested to know how they're going about it. Is they introduce a blanket ban, a blanket power so they put the traffic restriction order out across the whole city, but they don't enforce it unless local communities ask for it to be enforced. Which gets them off the problem of trying to keep, and I have pointed that out to the Highways Transport Committee, by the way. All this stuff has been known before and been tackled before. So I agree, Martin is correct, is that they can't just bring in a ban that suddenly applies universally, partly because it would be just impossible to police. But this compromise between making it possible to ban it everywhere, but only actually doing it when it's requested, seems a sensible approach to me.
And it also says a lot about the value of these local groups such as yours and ours, where we're trying to convey the views of people who are using the spaces in the area. Yeah. We've got a comment from Suki on Twitter to say that she moved from Camden, where accessibility was prioritised, and she was shocked that Cambridge pavements were so bad. She goes on to say that her mother was in a wheelchair and that was unpleasant for her So it was very bumpy and not enough dropped curbs, very uneven. And Suki, I can say as somebody who's pushed buggies around Cambridge for many years, that I can understand that very much. I remember sort of noticing, thinking, oh great, I finally got my baby off to sleep and the bumpy pavement is going to wake them up. So yeah, I sympathise. I know you notice suddenly when you use pavements with people in different scenarios, different circumstances, the poor quality of pavements around.
The state of the pavement is absolutely appalling. And all these things are linked, of course. I mean, part of the reason that many of the pavements decay rapidly is because heavy vehicles park on them on a regular basis, and driving on and off starts just dislodging the paving stones.
And perhaps, yeah, so starting with that as your the beginning of your campaign, yeah, brilliant idea.
I mean, again, something we pointed out to the Highways and Transport is they're worried about their assets. Their assets are being damaged by people driving on and off the pavement. So it would be a good idea to keep them from doing it if what they want to do is preserve their asset value.
We've got a further question from, I think this is from Wiki. Hello, Wiki. A question asking how many other counties have taken the Peterborough approach and issued TROs, and if you know that, and whether or not Peterborough's done that just for the city centre or for a large area, as in the county. Do you know?
Well, in the Peterborough case, as far as I know, it covers the whole of the area that the Peterborough City Council control. How extensive that is, I'm not sure, because I don't know where it meets the city boundaries, but it is, I mean, it is most of the city, certainly. We don't know precisely how many people have done it. In Scotland, there were a number of early examples, but Scotland has actually got a nationwide ban, which is going to be enforced from late 2023 or early 2024. I'm not sure which. So they've actually gone for the whole thing. They're just going to ban it across the piece. I'm not sure how they're going to enforce it. We know Sheffield is doing this. We know parts of Manchester have talked about it. I'm still trying to track down where it's actually happening, and part of the Central Living Streets organisation problem is people are not reporting where it's happening and where it's not happening. So there's no solid bank of information to draw on at the moment. We're having to find individual cases. So I can't answer that fully. I wish I could say exactly how many people were doing it and where, but I know of a few definite examples.
Well, thank you. We've got a question from John. Hello again, John. He asks, what is civil parking enforcement? From the Huntingdonshire District Council website, on-street parking offences within the district are currently a criminal offence, which means that enforcement is the responsibility of the police. Civil parking enforcement is the outcome of the decriminalisation process, which sees a new civil enforcement area created under the Traffic Management Act 2004. He goes on to say that a map of all the current civil enforcement areas in England can be found on their website. He also points out that the overall responsibility for signs and lines on street parking and related permits falls to the Highways Authority, which is Cambridgeshire County Council for us, of course, in accordance with the Traffic Management Act 2004. However, he also points out that the day-to-day enforcement powers will be delegated to Huntingdonshire District Council under an agency agreement. So a lot coming in there from John. There's part of me thinking that putting you in touch would be really helpful.
It would be useful, please, if we could be in touch. If you could tell me where I find this map of civil enforcement, because the more ammunition we have, the better. And it really would be good to know the details. I'm learning as I go along here.
Well, great. That's again the benefit of sharing an evening like tonight. We've had another comment from Martin too, to say that Camcycle has had its own success in getting pavement parking stamped out on East Road, I don't know if you remember the campaign. This was a few years ago. I don't know, Roxanne, if you can remember. I don't remember the year, but I remember seeing the evidence. And well done to David, really, for raising this problem more widely, because it is at least a citywide problem. So yeah, so that's a thank you really from Martin.
I'm sure it's a county-wide problem, to be truthful, but it's not. You know, we can only act in the area where we have members. It doesn't really work otherwise.
And I wonder that about your reach and whether or not there might be opportunities to work more widely in Cambridgeshire with the Cambridge Living Streets group.
I think, well, I mean, I'd like to see people head up other areas, partly because they have specialist needs, or you know, things are different in different places, and you know, there's only so much that I or our very small active group can take on, which limits things. What we are doing, and one of the next things we're going to do, is go around the wards in Cambridge, ward by ward, and start logging and photographing the worst pavement breakdowns, the places where the street furniture is wrong, where we've got, you know, persistent pavement parking, flooding, etc. Just trying to get a picture of what's happening in the wards in Cambridge, so we can start involving the ward councillors more closely in what's happening in their area.
I don't know, David, if you've seen some of our previous monthly meetings, but in December and January, we hosted 2 guests, both of whom talked about campaigning in their areas and the enormous value of going door to door and speaking to people on the doorstep as a way of forwarding your campaigning. So yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Roxanne's come in with a question asking, what do you think should be done about legalised parking on pavements in areas like Romsey, the sort of little streets off Mill Road where they are far too narrow for parking, so it's the parking lines are drawn on the pavements?
I suspect that this is going to be a nut that we're not going to crack in the first run, however successful you might be with the initial bit. I mean, in a way, I think it's a mistake that's been made and hard to rectify now. I suppose hopes for that generally rest on whether or not some sort of restrictions on traffic in Cambridge are brought in as part of the bigger picture that I know the GLC is pursuing. GCP is pursuing across this, trying to get people, you know, you'd have to make it one side of the street parking only, and which side is that going to be, and which cars are going to get it? I think it's an uphill struggle. That said, I walk through those streets regularly, and it's a nightmare because you're always in the road. There's, you know, bin day, you're on the road permanently. Other times there's renovation going on in some house or other, or something, and you know, you're driven back into the road. And people with wheelchairs or mobility scooters, you have to use the road every time. There's no other alternative for them. So I sympathise. It was an absolutely dreadful decision.
Perhaps something for when you have more resources at your fingertips.
And a bit of momentum, a bit of wind in our sails with councillors, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. Simon has asked here, I don't know whether or not you know, David, if there's been any outcome from the GCP parking discussion initiative, which closed on the 21st of March. Do you have any inside info about that?
I've not actually learnt what the outcome was there. I did ask whether they were interested in pavement parking, and they're not. I mean, according to them, this is about where the parking spaces are and how they're allocated, etc. So I couldn't shoehorn pavement parking into it at the time. Perhaps I should have pushed harder. Maybe we could have dealt with it or got it included in some way. But I look forward to reading what's going on, because, you know, the with the push for residence parking everywhere, I suspect it's going to keep displacing people to other to areas of Cambridge where that hasn't happened yet, and I suspect that it's going to cause huge problems for us.
Yep. Further evidence that we need to encourage more people to move actively around in and around the city. We could go on and on. Anthony Carpin's asking, which part of Cambridge would be the best, do you think, to pilot a reporting campaign? For example, would it be one with a critical mass of community activists who are willing and able to report cases to the enforcement authorities, or would a pilot be better focused somewhere else?
It's a good question. I mean, at the moment, for want of a better approach, I am actually taking it alphabetically. So I'm going up next weekend to Abbey to go around and photograph the spots that they've identified there. But there are better ways of prioritizing this if I know that I do have a group of activists who are prepared to do it. And I have got a message out with members to try and see, I mean, who's going to take an interest and who's going to get involved with it locally. Because the small group who turn up for regular meetings are not distributed widely enough for us to cover the wards with them. But they are the activists and they need to prod people into action.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were talking just then, I was thinking about the extent to which we can work in tandem in some ways on this. And I see that Anthony Carpin has asked, can Camcycle team up with Living Streets at the community fairs, for example, later this summer? I don't know, David and other viewers, if you're aware, but things like the Arbury Carnival, Chesterton Festival, Cherry Hinton Festival, lots of those things are coming back this year, which is fantastic for communities. And of course, they do, among other things, they provide an opportunity to have awareness raising stalls to sort of spread the word and engage the public. So yeah, I'm sure that that's something that we can think about.
If we could team up, that would be great. I did do the where was it? The Queen Edith's Way meeting last year, but that's the only one which I've been able to attend. Mostly because it's been COVID during almost the entire time we've been in existence.
Yeah, which makes it really, astonishing in that sense that you've managed to grow from such a small group. Did you say you were half a dozen initially to being about 75 now following the publication of your report? So yeah. Impressive work.
It's slow, but I mean, the more
we've got somebody else here showing appreciation. Gabriel saying that he's very much looking forward to enforcement in the South Cambs area, and I suspect there are lots of our people in our audience this evening who are thinking the same thing, that they would love to see enforcement around them.
If you want to team up from South Cambs with us, I mean, we will happily welcome you and sort of try and provide support to get things moving as far as it's possible. To extend an offer.
That's great. Thanks, David. We've got Martin has also come in with a point, really, just to say that South Cambridgeshire has at last agreed to take on civil enforcement powers. It's one of only 7 councils in the country left that leave this to the police, and it should come in within a few years. So yeah, some more encouraging things. Roxanne is coming in again on the opportunity for us to meet, and be part of some community events, possibly alongside Living Streets in Cambridge. And Roxanne's pointing out that we'd love to have stalls at all of these events, but she's absolutely right to point out that that's very dependent on our having volunteers who are happy to join us, come along and attend and talk to people. It really is such a brilliant way to engage people and also just to sort of grow the community within Camcycle after so long of not being together and in person. So it can be, they can be really nice days out together. So we'd love to hear from you if you would be happy to join us on some of these events. And of course that applies to just Camcycle going to things, but obviously alongside Living Streets too. We've got a comment from Twitter here from the Two-Wheeled Wolf. I don't know the real name, saying don't forget the Home Office guidance on pavement cycling. Don't give safe spaces to cycle and then people will cycle on the pavements. The Home Office said this is okay.
It's a fair comment.
It's tricky, isn't it? Particularly when we're aware of the different vulnerable cyclists, where there's insufficient provision, but equally the impact that then has on people walking on the pavement.
The real issue we have in Cambridge is so many of our pavements are so narrow that sharing them becomes extremely difficult. I mean, you know, without adding extra traffic to them. Yeah,
indeed. Anthony Carpin has come in to say Peterborough is still a unitary council. Cambridge is still in a two-tier area, so powers and funding are not like for like comparable. No. Ditto the comparison with London and per capita transport funding. So yeah, thank you for your point there, Anthony. There's a question here from Philip Lund. Hello, Philip, one of our members again. Asking, is there any mileage in getting people to put an agreed leaflet on the windscreens of cars parked on the pavements to point out that what they're doing is inconvenient to many people? And I don't know if others have seen, but there are some really nice examples of school streets where children have done that, where they've slapped kind of, you know, mock-up, what are they called, you know, like parking tickets on cars that park too close to the school gates and cause a hazard. So yeah, do you think there's any mileage in that? As part
I think it's a lovely idea, and I did at one point suggest it, but several of our members were extremely nervous about getting beaten up by the drivers if they were caught doing it, because apparently, and I do know this actually, drivers can get very angry if you apparently from their point of view dispute their right to the entire road, including the pavement, all bits, you know, the forecourts of the shops, everything.
Very difficult, isn't it? So much jostling for space in a place like Cambridge, where, as you say, space is limited for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I spent an entire argument trying to fend off somebody about pavement parking. So I know how difficult some motorists can be about this. As far as some of them are concerned, it's an absolute human right, and there's no way anybody is going to stop them, unless, of course, they get fined, in which case I'm sure they will stop immediately.
Or there were a more convenient way for them to move around other than in a car.
No,
sorry, I keep going to keep the messaging going. We've got another question from Wookie here asking, how do Camcycle and Living Streets best combine forces to get a bigger share of transport space, as opposed to ending up arguing over shared use on the tiny pavement space that we've been allocated? And I think that's a really important question, because ultimately we are clearly aligned in our aims for people living in the space. But we do nonetheless, you know, there are tensions.
I mean, in my experience so far, the tensions have been quite small. I mean, the number of complaints we get about cyclists on the pavements have been few compared with, for instance, e-scooters, which I get all the time. So it's a perfectly livable compromise. I don't think anybody wants to turn this into a battle. We've got bigger fish to fry than arguing with each other. And the problems about budgets being devoted in the right areas, proper maintenance, etc., really matters far more than all the rest of this. These questions about whether or not there are minor infractions in odd corners. So I don't want to turn into a battle, certainly.
That's an important point, isn't it? And I think that perhaps what we're doing here in your, for example, contributing to our magazine as one of our featured local groups working on the zero carbon, effectively working with us on the zero carbon streets campaign, and things like this evening, you know, looking at ways in which we overlap, looking to build bridges as local groups, even where we're not, you know, necessarily campaigning for specifically the same things.
Absolutely.
I know that Roxanne a while ago put out the last call for questions on Facebook. So thank you to everybody who's sent in their questions this evening, and enormous thanks, David, for joining us, particularly when, as you say, you're not feeling your best. So we really appreciate everything that you've been able to talk to us about this evening.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's great, and please stay in touch. I'd like to make sure we align ourselves, as much as we conceivably can, because I fear that it's difficult enough to get attention paid to any of these issues when councillors meet, and the more voices there are in the right area, the more it's going to help get at least something done. So thank you.
You're welcome, and that's a lovely call out to finish with. If you're not already involved in Living Streets or Camcycle, then please consider joining us. David, we're going to be moving on to our Camcycle specific campaign roundup now. So you're very welcome to join us, but if you'd rather go and have a drink or just relax a little bit, then we understand completely.
I'll stay for a few minutes. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks again for joining us and delivering your talk this evening and answering our questions. Thank you. Bye. So thank you, Roxanne, for feeding in so many questions this evening, and thank you again to all of you who've engaged and sent in information as well as questions for our speaker. Roxanne, I'm handing over now for our campaign roundup. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosie, and thank you, David. Wonderful presentation and great facilitation, Rosie. Great job. We have such a wonderful team here at Camcycle, and if you missed our little sneak peek earlier in the meeting, I would like to introduce the newest member of our team, our infrastructure campaigner, Josh Grantham. So Josh joined us just yesterday and is already making a wonderful difference to the team. It's been hard at work. Josh, hello.
Hello. Good to see you again.
We've been working hard in the office today, haven't we? Josh, what have you been up to on your first 2 days?
Oh, I've been out cycling, most importantly. I've done some photo shoots. I've been getting to know the systems, meeting some important people. Looking forward to meeting more people. However, lots of names, lots of information, lots of knowledge, and really just been hitting the ground running, I think, and it's been great.
You certainly have. So we've already had Josh at work on our election survey questions. You've already attended a site visit with developers. It's been a full-on first 2 days. I can see a big woohoo. Welcome, Josh, from Gabrielle. Tim Burford. These are names you don't necessarily know yet, Josh, but these are people you will most certainly meet. Tim Burford has said, hi, Josh, welcome. You'll see Tim commenting on lots of our magazine articles in particular with wonderful copy editing advice. John is complimenting your bike hangers and possibly the bikes too. No bike envy here. So it's only the first 2 days for Josh, so we won't put you too far in the deep end and ask what you shall be working on in the coming weeks. But Wookie has very rightly asked, could you give us a little bit of information on your background? Where are you from? How did you get into this? And tell us, Josh, why have you come to work for us at Camcycle?
Okay, well, as I was asked where I'm from, I'll start from the beginning. So I grew up in Kettering, so just an hour north of here, driving, and started cycling from a young age. I cycled to school, even though my dad was a teacher at the school, and he would drive from 10. So that I think I always liked the freedom that came with cycling. And then from there, I studied engineering, kind of always having that passion in the built environment, and really engineering was a kind of gateway for me to understand how everything pieced together. And I kind of went into industry and got some experience. And then, I just kept on moving project-wise to, interesting projects that were talking about sustainability and kind of, really on the edge of what we were doing. And that ultimately led me to do a master's in sustainable development, which just basically opened the door to so much information and insight. I ended up focusing on car-free design and kind of that integration between urban design, transport planning, engineering, and effectively how, if we take cars out of certain environments, we can change the whole fabric of the places we put together. That led to more projects. That led me to doing an active travel course to kind of complement my existing knowledge, and ultimately led me on a bike ride to pick up a Camcycle magazine and then see the job effectively being advertised. And the rest is very recent history.
Wookie's commenting that you should be called Josh Kettering, not Josh Grantham. You've headed in the wrong direction. Yeah. But I'm sure that will help everyone remember your name, Josh. Well, Josh, I'd just like to offer you a very warm welcome. And for our members who would really love to meet you, we've made sure you can come on the Reach Ride. So there will be an opportunity there. And of course, we are working on various other ways that we can start getting everybody together in person. But if in particular, Josh, we're hoping to set up lots of meetings so you can meet all the wonderful people working locally to, create wonderful streets for active travel in their communities. So if you're one of those people watching us today or on YouTube later on and you'd like to meet with Josh or the Camcycle team, please send us an email, contact@camcycle.org.uk, and we will start setting up all these meetings. You're going to be very, very busy, Josh.
Yeah, that's for the best.
And I have been saying in various emails I'm sending, you can have this meeting while riding a bike. So we'll make sure that you're getting right out across Cambridgeshire and keeping those beautiful bikes very busy. But I suppose I should give everybody some of our other updates, because Josh isn't the only piece of news that we have from the last month. So I shall share my screen. But thank you so much, Josh, and feel free to stick around. If you've got any thoughts from the last 2 days relevant to any of our news, you'll be welcome to pitch in. You too, Rosie. Okay, well, we have already introduced Josh, so welcome, Josh. But I must say that now that we have 4 staff members, we've got some work to do. But it's really great timing that Josh has joined the Camcycle team, because we have had some rather scary announcements, although I think most of us knew this was coming, from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The latest report saying that really it is now or never to take some serious action to prevent or lessen the effects of climate change. But there's a little bit of hope there. And they've said if we crack on, for example, we could reduce transport-related consumption by 25% through compact land use and less car-dependent infrastructure. And that's what our Zero Carbon Streets campaign is all about. But there is more to gain from improving our local streets than just a reduction in climate change. So we want to discover the best streets in Cambridgeshire and use these as inspiration so that we can create more outstanding places to live, work, and visit. And to do that, we are launching our Best Streets survey. And we want our members and the public to complete the survey and tell us which streets they think are the best and why. We want your urban and your rural examples. And we hope that through discovering the best streets in Cambridgeshire, we can use these as inspiration to help create sustainable and livable places for the future. Because as I'm sure many of our members know, those low carbon streets, those streets that inspire active travel, are often the healthiest, most beautiful and thriving streets. So please help us to find out what aspects combine to make a street an unbeatable place to live or visit, and which ideas from those streets should we use to improve other streets in our region. So please do complete the survey. It's just been launched today. Please share it with all of your networks. We really want to reach out beyond Cambridge. So if you're part of a Facebook group or another community network, please share this, because we want as many diverse contributions as possible to our Best Streets survey. And I'm curious, I want to know, are there any secret, wonderful streets that I don't know about and that I should go and visit? And I am sure there are plenty of other people who are curious too. We're also, as part of this survey, we are getting information on the streets that perhaps could be improved, so that we can see what ideas people have to improve their would be a favorite if only it was a bit better streets. So if you can share information on both directions. And we'll be announcing some of the results from that survey around the time that we launch our next Zero Carbon Streets fundraising campaign. Now, I know we've heard about this a lot, but I hope that our members and our supporters have seen what their wonderful, generous contributions have enabled us to achieve. We now have hired Josh as our infrastructure campaigner to really drive forward our Zero Carbon Streets campaign. And we are already seeing, and we will continue to see, the impact of that wonderful contribution our members and supporters have made. However, we do need to keep it up, and we have another amazing opportunity for fundraising. We've been provided with £10,000, so that's £5,000 from the Big Give, and that's £5,000 from a Camcycle donor. And this £10,000 can now be matched in our upcoming Big Give fundraising campaign. And sadly, my notes haven't come up on the screen, so if I remember correctly, it's launched on the 24th of April. So from the 24th of April, you can donate to Camcycle, and we have £10,000 to match those donations, and we're aiming for that big total of £20,000, so we can keep this campaign going into 2023 and 2024. So thank you for your contributions so far. Look at all the wonderful things we're doing, and please, if you can, please contribute in April, or perhaps help us share the word so that we can reach new people who would perhaps like to support Camcycle. But we do hope you're pleased with what we are doing. I've had a question come through on Facebook. Is Josh full-time? Josh is working 4 very full, busy days a week. And like everyone at Camcycle, we all have that bit of flexibility to make sure we can get out into our community. But that's the amount that we are funding for the Zero Carbon Streets campaign for Josh. But it's not just the match funding campaigns that have been contributing to our work. Had some other wonderful news in the last month. We received a £9,500 grant from the National Lotteries Foundation through their working Together for Our Planet campaign. It was a lovely surprise to receive this grant, and the same day that we were awarded the grant, I happened to cross paths with a cycling celebrity in Cambridge. Those who are on Instagram or TikTok in particular may be familiar with Sigrid the cycling cat. But what a good fortune that I crossed paths with Sigrid the cycling cat and her wonderful owner, Travis. And we went for a bike ride around Cambridge together, and they were very kind and offered to help us promote this wonderful grant. So thank you, Sigrid and Travis, for posing for the photo, for helping to show off some of Cambridge infrastructure on their very, very popular TikTok and Instagram accounts. I've put the Instagram account on the slide here. Sadly, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't actually know what account to share. But if you're really interested, I'm sure we can send it to you. And you can also find Travis and Sigrid on Twitter if you'd like to see what they saw when they're in Cambridge. But a big thank you to the National Lottery Foundation for also contributing to our Zero Carbon Streets campaign. So I'm sure members can anticipate quite a lot of activity in this direction in the coming months, now that we're well resourced. Some of that work, really, it can't come soon enough, because some rather sad news, we have had another tragic incident on our Cambridgeshire roads. recently we placed another ghost bike on the junction of Little Wilbraham Road and the A1303, where sadly a collision led to the death of a man who was cycling there. So we've placed another one of these bikes, and it's just so frustrating. It's so tragic to see this happening in a location where we know that improvements were recently made, but sadly nothing that would have actually made cycling or walking safer in that area. We await the results of any investigations into this before we can really comment, but it's just not good enough that we've had so many deaths and injuries on our roads. So we must keep up the campaigning, and we must make sure that this campaign is extending beyond Cambridge and out to service our rural communities so they can travel around their community and also into Cambridge. And for us in Cambridge, so we can go out and visit our friends as well. But just, yeah, it's very sad. But thank you to Alan and Anna for their very wonderful work in preparing the bike and placing it in this location. And our thoughts to the family of the man who did die while cycling on our roads. An example of some good infrastructure, the Newmarket Road underpass has received its finishing touches with a lovely mural. So we had a short closure for the Newmarket Road underpass, but if you haven't been there for a while, do go and visit and see the Cambridge inspired artwork in the tunnel. There is some cycling imagery there as well. But if you are traveling there at dusk, it's a rather interesting picture, but it will make you remember that at dusk, the Chisholm Trail, particularly around the Newmarket Road underpass, is a crossing point for toads on their way to the lake. So please keep your eyes peeled from dusk into evening. Don't run over the toads, and there are some volunteers who head down there every day to collect the toads in a bucket and make sure they safely make their journey across the path to the lake. Hopefully this isn't a long-term situation. The toads may be a bit confused by the changes in the infrastructure there, but even if it is long-term, we must do what we can to preserve our wildlife in the area. So keep your eyes peeled for toads when you're using the Chisholm Trail. Now it's that time of year again, and you may see some tired faces from the Camcycle team. We've been working hard on getting the election survey up and running for yet another election round. Thank goodness it is not as big as it was last year. That was a monster survey, but it is still a huge amount of work. And we're preparing questions for Cambridge City Council, South Cambridgeshire District Council, Huntingdon District Council, and Peterborough City Council for the various wards that are up for election. You can see previous surveys, and you will be able to read this survey when published on the elections page of our website. But we would absolutely appreciate any contributions to get more questions prepared for the various wards. If you can do so, you can jump online on Cyclescape. I've put the link there. It's quite long, so if that's a bit difficult, just send us an email. We'll point you in the right direction, or we're very happy to have any questions that you might like to ask candidates in your ward. Send them by email and we will put them into the survey if we can. But we've got quite a few gaps, particularly out in our rural areas. We still haven't got all the coverage we'd like to there. So if you've got a hot topic you'd like candidates to comment on, please do send those questions in. But we will keep our members informed as that survey progresses. And if you are involved in any of the local political parties, please get in touch and help us get the contact details for your candidates. Rosie is nodding because that's Rosie's job, and it's been my job before, and I can tell you that is one of the hardest parts of this survey, is just tracking down those email addresses so we can get the survey to candidates in a timely manner. So please, if you can help us find those details, get in touch. Now, one of the questions that we thought we might have to have in the survey, but luckily we've finally seen some progress, is the removal of the barriers on the bridge over the A14. Finally, they are gone. So huge thank you to all the people who worked on our campaign to get these barriers removed. What a frustration that we had to go through this yet again. And that even since then, we have seen more barriers appear where they shouldn't. But we continue to win this battle. We will continue to push back on inaccessible barriers. So huge thank you to everyone who worked on this. Thank you to the decision makers and officers who eventually got around to removing them. We do appreciate it. And I've just seen a comment, and I'm stating this publicly to make sure it happens. John has promised to send us some questions for Huntingdonshire later tonight. So note that down, Rosie. John has promised. John, we've got a few questions that we've drafted from comments that we picked up from the Hunts Facebook group. So do get in touch and we'll send you what we've got as well, because we definitely need a keen eye to check over them. Now, back to the bollards. As you can tell, we have a slight delay with Facebook, but Gabe is confirming that the snagging issue around the bollards facing the wrong way has now been corrected. So thank you for your keen eye on that, Gabe. As you can see from my picture, the bollard isn't facing the right way. Apparently, now it is. If someone's got a photo of that and could send it through, we would most definitely appreciate that. Now, some other good news. The cycleway from Soham to Wicken has been approved by the Combined Authority. I was on holidays last week. I haven't listened to this meeting yet, so I can't tell you much about what was decided, but Anna has reassured me, share this slide. This is great news about a new cycleway approved by the Combined Authority, and I'm already eyeing it off for a cycling adventure. So great to see some more cycle routes heading further out of Cambridge into our rural areas, and hopefully that will help more people to visit Wicken Fen and get out into nature as well. So thank you, Combined Authority. We also have our spring magazine, which is out. You may have seen Rosie waving that around before. A huge thank you to everybody who contributed to our magazine for this edition. Our apologies, once again, the magazine was a little bit late. It's just, as always, been a hugely busy time. And as we've been saying to Josh, well, Josh, you're here now, so you can help us. And that means our magazine can get out on time with all the latest campaigning news. But I'd also like to say a huge appreciation to Sue for her hard work in getting the magazine out before she rushed off on holiday. Not the most relaxed way to get off on holiday. And also a big thank you to our magazine distribution volunteers who worked with us with a few workarounds to make sure the magazines got in their hands while Sue was away. So thank you to everybody for their patience and understanding while we made it work. And if you've got contributions for the summer edition of the magazine, the deadline is the 17th of April. So please get them in ASAP. Next up is the Reach-Ride. Oh my goodness. The Reach-Ride is back. I'm so excited. So the Reach-Ride is on the first May bank holiday, the 2nd of May. We will, as we used to, meet in front of the Guildhall. We will also pick people up along the way, so you can jump on the Reach-Ride train at the Green Dragon Bridge. Why not the Chisholm Trail Bridge, the Newmarket Road Park and Ride? There will also be a departure from Ely. So thank you to Ely Cycling Campaign for hosting the Ely departure. And I don't doubt for a minute there will be a range of informal gatherings across Cambridge as people get together and cycle to the Reach-Ride. And if you've formed some wonderful connections with your neighbours, perhaps you've got a neighbourhood WhatsApp group formed during the pandemic, why not suggest the street gets together and rides together to join the Reach-Ride? Not a Camcycle organised event, because we are not going to do all the insurance and risk assessments for every ride. But if you would informally like to organise a ride from your street, I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. The Reach-Ride is a huge event that we get together from not very much. On a good sunny day, we'll easily get 1,000 people cycling from the city of Cambridge to the town of Reach. We visit the fair and then we cycle back. But it takes volunteers to make this wonderful event happen. So if you can help us before the day, we need people to help us distribute leaflets and posters, put them up in bike shops, cafes, workplaces, the pub, anywhere people are still going. Put it in the window if you're on a busy street so your neighbours can see that the Reach-Ride is coming. And we also need people who can help us to put up signs and clear the routes in the days before the ride. and that's what we call the Recce Ride, and that's on Saturday the 30th of April. So if you can't make it on the day but you'd like to see the route and you don't mind stopping occasionally to trim a branch or sweep the path or put up a sign, then you can join us on the Recce Ride. Please send an email to contact@camcycle.org.uk. Let us know if you'd like to attend and we'll give you all the details. We also need volunteers on the day. So it's very important that we have ride marshals, and if we've got anyone with first aid qualifications, that's extremely helpful. Please get in touch if you'd like to help people find their way on the Reach Ride. If you're not sure about that for the whole ride, but you'd like to be a friendly face at the start of the ride so people feel welcome, help handing out maps and checking on bikes, we certainly need people to be greeters at the start of the ride at the various meeting points. We'll also need some people who don't mind sticking around a bit at the Reach end of the ride to help people find cycle parking, and we're also looking for people who can use the counter and count how many people cycle into Reach. We're also looking for photographers and people who are savvy with social media so that we can share the story of the event. And there's always, at the end of the ride, someone's got to pedal at the end of it and pick up all the signs and just make sure we haven't left any rubbish behind at the end of the ride. So if that leisurely end of day ride sounds like something you would enjoy, there's that option too. I hope I've mentioned all the roles, but if you've got another idea of how you'd like to help the Reach Ride, then please get in touch. But just cannot wait to have the Reach Ride back again. John has asked for a map of the route. John, I would say pop onto our website. The map should be there, or if not now, it will be very, very soon. I don't have a map to hand at this moment. Oh, I think that's all of my updates. I'm just checking in the chats in case anybody has got an update that I have failed to mention. Now is your moment, because we're getting to the end of the meeting. Just had another John Powell from Ely, also suggesting why not catch the train to Ely for the Reach Ride, and you can cycle from Ely to Reach and then Reach to Cambridge at the end of the day. That's an option too. Right, so if this wasn't enough news for you, well, come back again next month. We've got more news, no doubt. We might even get Josh to give an update of his first month in the role. But our next meeting, we shall have lessons from Ghent with the Deputy Mayor, Philip. Yeah, I'm not going to do this right. What you? I should be better at this. I have a French surname, but no chance. But Philip from Ghent, and someone will brief me on how to say that next time, will be joining us, and I'm really looking forward to learning about how they created a low traffic circulation plan for Ghent. So I think this is going to be a very, very popular meeting. Please do share the word and perhaps share it with your local councillors, because perhaps they could take some inspiration and apply it to Cambridge. So that would be wonderful. And then in June, well, we are talking about an in-person meeting because I'm sure people are sick of just hearing from Camcycle staff and would like to hear from each other. So no promises yet. We have sent a survey out to our members to find out what people think about in-person meetings, and we've had quite a lot of positive response to that. But our goal is to make sure that our meetings are still able to be accessed by people who aren't ready to come to events in person. We know that we are not back to whatever the normal life used to be by before. So don't fear, we won't be leaving people behind. We are looking at plans to keep an online presence, make sure we record our meetings, put them online, perhaps alternating between in-person and online. But at the moment, we are working towards a plan for some form of in-person meeting for June, should circumstances and the environment allow us to do that. So if you've got any ideas or suggestions of how you would like to see an in-person meeting progress in June, then please do get in touch. We'd love to hear it. But more than anything, we would love to see some people in real life once again. Right, that's the end of me rabbiting on. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, David, for a wonderful presentation and for your work for the Walkers of Cambridge. Thank you, Josh, for being our new employee and saying hello. And thank you, Rosie, for your fabulous work facilitating the meeting today. We'll see you all soon. Bye.